Patient collapses. No pulse. Should you shock? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping right into one of the absolute highest stakes, adrenaline-fueled environments in all of medicine, managing a cardiac arrest. Whether you're an MBBS student, gearing up for NEET PG or INICET, or you're already in the trenches as an emergency medicine resident, mastering these exact resuscitation steps, it's completely non-negotiable. So let's take all that chaos of a code and transform it into a highly structured, crystal-clear clinical pathway.
I want you to really picture this for a second. A patient suddenly collapses right in front of you. You rush over, nothing, no pulse. You get the monitor attached, now pause. Ask yourself that critical question again. Should you shock? Your immediate gut instinct might be to just reach for those defibrillator paddles, right? But as we're about to see, how you answer this single question dictates the entire trajectory of whether this patient survives or not.
So, here is our clinical roadmap for today. 1. Cardiac arrest basics. 2. The non-shockable algorithm. 3. CPR and early epinephrine. 4. The diagnostic hunt for the H's and T's. 5. Advanced monitoring with POCUS. And 6. We'll wrap up with a high-yield exam summary. Let's dive in. Section 1, Cardiac Arrest Basics, the Foundations of Resuscitation.
Okay, to run a code effectively, we have to totally shift our mindset. We need to move from the initial panic of a sudden collapse into the highly logical, methodical mindset of a resuscitation leader. And it starts by categorizing cardiac arrest into two main pathways. First, you have your shockable rhythms. This is ventricular fibrillation and pulseless ventricular tachycardia. Then, you have your non-shockable rhythms, which are pulseless electrical activity, or PEA, and asystole. Here's the difference. With shockable rhythms, there's this chaotic, crazy electrical storm in the heart that a defibrillator can literally reset. But with PEA and asystole, you either have a totally flatlined electrical system, or you have organized electricity, but a heart muscle that just isn't pumping any blood. There's no chaotic rhythm to reset here.
Section 2, the non-shockable algorithm. The action protocol. Because there's absolutely no shockable target in PEA or asystole, the American Heart Association gives us a very specific, step-by-step action protocol. The goal is to maximize the chances of restarting the heart's natural pacemaker. And it's basically a continuous loop of these 4 precise steps. Step 1, high-quality CPR for 2 uninterrupted minutes. Push hard, push fast. Step 2, administer epinephrine as soon as humanly possible. Step 3, pause briefly for a rhythm check. And Step 4, actively hunt down and treat any reversible causes. This loop, this is the ultimate scaffolding of your entire resuscitation effort. And I really need to emphasize this absolute golden rule. If the patient is in asystole or PEA, this is not a shockable rhythm. Seriously, do not attempt to defibrillate these patients. Shocking asystole or PEA wastes incredibly precious time, it interrupts your chest compressions, and it offers absolutely zero clinical benefit. Your only tools right now are high-quality compressions, medications, and your diagnostic brain. Section 3, CPR and early epinephrine, the critical interventions. So we know that high-quality CPR mechanically pushes blood to the vital organs, right? But we need pharmacology to actively clamp down those peripheral blood vessels and force that blood right into the coronary arteries. And the magic number for that is 1 milligram. Per the AHA guidelines, you need to administer 1 milligram of epinephrine either intravenously or intraosseously every 3 to 5 minutes. Epinephrine is a massively potent peripheral vasoconstrictor. By clamping down those vessels during CPR, you significantly boost the coronary perfusion pressure, and that pressure is directly associated with getting a return of spontaneous circulation, or ROSC. Now, you might be wondering, does the timing actually matter that much? Yes, absolutely. There's this massive BMJ registry study that looked at over 25,000 in-hospital cardiac arrests, and the data is wild. It shows that when you give epi is just as crucial as if you give it. There is a severe, stepwise drop-off in survival the longer you wait. If you get it in within 1 to 3 minutes, your odds are at their absolute peak. Delay it to 4 to 6 minutes, survival drops. Push it past 9 minutes, and the odds of a neurologically intact survival just plummet. Remember this, time is literally brain and heart muscle. Give that epi early. Let's talk about how we actually deliver that epi, because this is a huge part of our clinical strategy. For a while, intraosseous or IO access was the quick go-to. It's fast, it's reliable in a pinch, but recent systematic reviews analyzing like 140,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests completely shifted our perspective.
It turns out intravenous or IV access is actually associated with significantly better odds of ROSC and much more favorable neurological outcomes at discharge. So, the new rule of thumb, prioritize IV access first. But actually, if it's too difficult or it's just taking way too long, don't hesitate. Immediately drill that IO.
Okay, here's another real game changer during your CPR cycles: quantitative waveform capnography. This measures your end-tidal CO2, which is the carbon dioxide being exhaled while you're doing compressions. It gives you a real-time, live gauge of your CPR quality. If that number starts dropping, it means whoever is doing compressions is getting fatigued and needs to swap out. But even cooler, if you suddenly see a massive sustained spike in that EtCO2, it's a huge clue that the patient just achieved ROSC, and you know this even before you pause to check for a pulse.
Section 4, the diagnostic hunt, the H's and T's. So, while your team is aggressively pumping the chest and pushing epi, you, as the leader, have to become a high-stakes clinical detective. Why did this patient arrest in the first place? Because listen, if you don't fix the underlying cause, they are simply not going to survive. We use the classic 5 H's and 5 T's to hunt this down. Let's hit the 5 H's first. Hypovolemia. Are they bleeding out? Get them IV fluids or blood. Hypoxia. Are they starved of oxygen? Secure that airway fast. Hydrogen ion, meaning severe acidosis. Ensure good ventilation and maybe think about sodium bicarbonate. Hypo or hyperkalemia. Check those old ECGs for peak T waves or widened QRS and treat it. And finally, hypothermia. If their core temp is freezing, you have to warm them up, because a cold heart simply won't respond to your drugs or your CPR.
Next up, we have the 5 T's. Toxins. Could this be an accidental overdose? Call poison control. Look for specific antidotes. Tamponade. Is there fluid crushing the heart, muffling sounds, and tanking their pressure? You need to do a pericardiocentesis. Tension pneumothorax. Look for unequal breath sounds or a deviated trachea. That needs an immediate needle decompression. And then thrombosis, which is split into 2. Thrombosis of the lungs, meaning a massive PE, or thrombosis of the coronary arteries, meaning a massive widowmaker heart attack. For those, you might actually need to consider fibrinolytics if the scenario fits.
Section 5, Advanced Monitoring, Point of Care Ultrasound, or POCUS. You might be thinking, how on earth do I find all those H's and T's in the middle of a screaming, chaotic code? Well, you look inside. POCUS is a total lifesaver here. During your brief pulse checks, it lets you make one crucial distinction. It tells you if you're dealing with true PEA, where the ultrasound shows absolute cardiac standstill, meaning the muscle isn't moving at all despite electrical activity, or if you have pseudo-PEA. In pseudo-PEA, you actually see coordinated myocardial activity. The heart is trying to squeeze, but the output is just way too weak for you to feel a pulse. Spotting pseudo-PEA is massive because it carries a much better prognosis, and it usually means there's an easily reversible cause hiding right in front of you. Think of POCUS as your clinical X-ray vision. With just one quick subcostal view, you can immediately spot a pericardial effusion causing tamponade, or a massively dilated right ventricle that points right to a pulmonary embolism, or even an underfilled collapsing heart that screams severe hypovolemia. But there is a hard, strict rule here. Using the ultrasound can never interfere with your CPR. Your pulse and rhythm checks, even with that probe resting right on the patient's chest, must be kept to strictly under 10 seconds. Literally, count it out loud. Section 6, High-Yield Exam Summary. All right, let's lock this into your memory for the wars and the boards. PEA equals no pulse despite an organized rhythm. Asystole equals flatline. The treatment for both is high-quality CPR plus epinephrine plus identifying reversible causes and absolutely no shock. I'll repeat that for the people in the back. PEA equals no pulse, asystole equals flatline, treatment equals CPR plus epinephrine plus identify reversible causes, no shock. The AHA's chains of survival are a great reminder that everything we just broke down lives right inside those critical middle links. If you flawlessly execute this non-shockable algorithm, you are literally pushing your patient to the next link, recovery. So the next time that monitor alarms and shows a completely flat line, I want you to ask yourself, is this truly asystole, or is there a hidden reversible cause just waiting for you to find it?